The castle had learned a new kind of silence, the kind that did not belong to midnight corridors or snowbound mornings, but to fear. Fear carried in the breath, caught under the tongue, swallowed before it could become a scream. It lived in the spaces between portraits, muttered complaints, in the skitter of a rat behind wainscot, in the sudden hush that fell when a group of students realized they were not alone. Albus moved through it as though through cold water. He did not hurry. He never hurried. Yet everything in his bearing suggested a readiness, a poise held on the edge of motion. A torch guttered as he passed, bending its flame away from him, and for a moment he felt the familiar prickle along his wand hand, the sense of magic disturbed, an old, listening sort of magic that had nothing to do with schoolwork. A raven-clawed girl stood pressed to the wall, her hands knotted together at her chest as if she could keep her heart from leaping out. Her eyes flicked to him, desperate for reassurance. Albus gave her a nod, gentle as a promise, and continued on. The rumor had become a presence, a monster beneath the school, a thing waking after 50 years. Children said it with the relish of horror until they reached the next corridor and saw the extra professors on patrol, the locked doors, the faces that did not smile. Then the relish soured. Albus reached the staircase and paused. Down below, far away, the great hall doors opened and shut again, and a draft of warmth rose up with the faintest echo of voices. Warmth and voices did not banish fear. They only made it sharper, because they reminded everyone of what could be taken. He looked at the stonework, at the serpentine carvings that time had softened but not erased. Hogwarts was ancient and stubborn, built to outlast wars, plagues, and ministers. Yet something inside it was old in a different way. Older than its towers, older than the names carved into plaques and trophies. Something that did not mind children. Albus lowered his gaze to the moving stairs and felt, without needing to see, that somewhere nearby a boy was watching. Very still, very patient, and very pleased with how frightened everyone had become. If fear had a scent, Albus thought it would smell like the great hall did that morning. Food and smoke and wet wool, layered over something metallic that belonged to the back of the throat. Students ate because they were told to eat, because breakfast was still breakfast, because normal things had to be performed like charms against the dark. At the Slytherin table, laughter rose in brief, bright spurts, practiced, almost defiant. The source of it sat halfway down the bench, his back straight, his hair neatly combed, his hands unmarked by ink or labor. Tom's smile moved through a group of younger boys like a warm draft through a cold room. He listened, he nodded, he offered a remark that made them grin. Their shoulders relaxed around him, drawn into the illusion that nothing could touch them if they sat close enough to brilliance. Albus kept his gaze soft, as though he were merely observing another student's social triumph. He had watched Tom for years, watched the way he gathered people, not as friends but as possessions, watched the way teachers leaned in when he spoke, as if their attention were a gift he could grant or withhold, watched the way other children's confidence evaporated under his eyes. Tom glanced up at the high table at last, as if he had felt the attention. His expression was open, respectful, almost affectionate. There was deference there, performed with such skill that it could have passed for sincerity to anyone who wanted to believe in it. Albus inclined his head in response. No challenge, no accusation. Not here. Not yet. On the high table, Armando sat with his shoulders slumped beneath his headmaster's robes, his face gray with sleeplessness. Nearby, Horace fussed with his napkin, attempting genial conversation and failing. The other professors wore the same tightness at the corners of their mouths, the same awareness of time running out. Tom returned to his friends. His smile resumed, and Albus saw, in the brief moment before the boy's gaze lowered, a flicker of impatience, like a blade catching light and vanishing again. A girl at the Hufflepuff table began to cry quietly into her hands. Her friend tried to shush her, eyes darting around as if tears themselves were dangerous. The older students pretended not to see. That was how terror lived, by teaching children shame. Albus folded his hands together, the gesture calm. Under the table, his wand pressed against his palm like an unanswered question. By mid-morning, the storm had thickened. Snow pressed itself against the windows like a pleading hand, and the staff room felt smaller for it, cramped with paper and worry. Armando stared at the parchment in front of him as though it might bite. "The board will not accept another death," he said, voice brittle. "And the ministry, Merlin help us. They will seize on any excuse to interfere." Horace tried to smile. It came out watery. "Interfere is such an ugly word, Armando. The ministry simply takes an interest. For the safety of the children." "No, for the safety of their reputations," Armando snapped, then sighed, suddenly older. "We are a school, not a battlefield." Albus stood near the hearth, hands loosely clasped behind him. The fire had been lit too high, perhaps by someone trying to scorch the chill out of their bones. It did nothing for the cold in the room. "You have patrols doubled," Albus said softly. "Doors sealed, curfews tightened. And still something moves." Armando's gaze flicked up. "You believe it is Slytherin's chamber?" "I believe," Albus said, "that a legend has teeth when fear feeds it." Horace made a small sound of protest. "Albus, now legends, children's stories. A serpentine chamber under the school, it's melodrama. And I must say, if we begin accusing houses, we will have riots on our hands. Slytherin is already defensive." "Defensive people," Albus replied, "are often hiding something." Horace's fingers tightened around his teacup. "You speak as though you have a suspect." Albus looked at the flames. "I have a concern." Armando rubbed his temples. "If you mean the boy, Tom." "I mean no one by name," Albus said, though his silence afterward rang louder than a spoken accusation. Horace leaned forward, attempting jovial authority. "Tom is the most gifted student I have taught in decades. Charming, diligent, and ambitious," Albus finished. Horace blinked. "Ambition is not a crime." "No," Albus agreed. "But there are ambitions that do not stop at prizes." Armando's mouth tightened. "We cannot tear a student apart on suspicion, not without proof, not in public." Albus's eyes lifted. "Then we must find what the castle is trying to hide." Armando hesitated, caught between fear of scandal and fear of blood. At last he nodded, a small capitulation. "Do what you can, quietly." Horace swallowed. "Quietly," he echoed, as if the word tasted wrong. Albus turned from the hearth and felt, beneath his calm, the shape of a choice forming, sharp, inevitable, and far from quiet. Outside, the air had teeth. Snow blew in thin sheets across the grounds, and the lake looked like a slab of iron under the sky. Albus pulled his cloak tighter and walked toward the pumpkin patch where a boy stood hunched like someone expecting a blow. Rubius's hands were enormous, red at the knuckles from cold and nervous picking. He tried to hide them in his sleeves and failed. When he saw Albus, his face crumpled with relief and dread tangled together. "Professor," he blurted, "I didn't do nothing. I swear it, Professor." "Me, Kenga." Albus stopped a few paces away, mindful of how quickly adults could loom. "I know," he said. Rubius stared at him, eyes wide. Yeah, do?" "I know you did not kill anyone," Albus said, and watched the boy's breath hitch, as if he had been holding it for days. Rubius's chin trembled. People were saying it were." He glanced toward the castle, as though the walls themselves listened. "It's 'cause of what I am." Albus's gaze softened. "People like to choose simple villains when they are afraid." Rubius swallowed hard. "There's a spider," he confessed in a rush, as though it were the worst crime imaginable. "I shouldn't have. I know I shouldn't have. But it weren't hurting no one. It's just smart, you know, like it listens." Albus imagined the creature, large and hungry and misunderstood. He imagined a boy offering love to something that frightened everyone else, because he knew what it meant to be feared. "Where is it?" Albus asked. Rubius hesitated, then nodded toward the edge of the forest, where the trees stood like a black wall. "In a box. I've been keeping it quiet." Albus did not ask more. "Not here." "Rubius," he said, "if someone approaches you today, someone offering help, someone asking questions, come to me first." Rubius's brows knit. "Why would?" "Because," Albus said gently, "there are people who understand your kindness and will use it against you." The boy's eyes flicked, uncertain. "Like who?" Albus looked toward the castle again. In one of the high windows, a pale shape moved and vanished. It might have been nothing. It might have been Tom watching the grounds with interest. Albus did not answer. He reached out and set a gloved hand briefly on Rubius's shoulder, a touch light as a feather. "Trust me." Rubius nodded, because he wanted desperately to. Albus turned back into the wind, and the snow stung his cheeks like warning. The bathroom smelled of soap that had not been used in years, and of something older. Stagnant water, mildew, grief. The taps dripped in an uneven rhythm, like a slow clock. Albus stepped inside and let the door swing almost shut behind him. A sob rose from the far end of the room, high and furious. "Go away," Myrtle wailed, voice echoing off tile. "Everyone comes in here, and everyone stares. And nobody ever. "Myrtle," Albus said. The ghost whipped around. Her face was blotched as though tears could bruise a spirit. Her spectacles magnified her eyes into wounded moons. "Oh," she said with sudden suspicion. "It's you, another teacher, come to tell me off, are you? I'm dead, and they still tell me off." "I came to ask for your help," Albus said. Myrtle floated closer, her robes trailing like mist. "Help?" she repeated, and there was bitter delight in the word, as if it were a joke. "No one wanted my help when I was alive." Albus let the silence sit, respectful. "I am sorry," he said, and meant it. Myrtle's mouth twisted. "Sorry doesn't bring you back," she snapped. Then, quieter, almost petulant, "What do you want?" "I want you to tell me what happened," Albus said. "Not what others claim. What you saw. What you heard." Myrtle's shoulders drew up as if bracing for mockery. "I was crying," she said, fiercely defensive. "In the cubicle, because Olive Hornby was teasing me. Again. And then I heard a boy. Someone came in. I thought it was her, come to laugh some more." Albus' heart tightened. "A boy," he echoed. "Yes," Myrtle said, and her voice shifted, different now, sharp with memory. "He was speaking. Funny. Not English. Not anything. Like hissing. Like a snake." Her hands clenched into fists that were made of fog. "I opened the door to tell him to stop, and I saw eyes. Yellow. Great big." She shuddered. "And then I was dead. Just like that." Albus's gaze slid to the sinks, to the tarnished metal taps, to the strange little serpents carved into the stone. "Did you see the boy's face?" Myrtle hesitated. Her pout faltered. "Not properly. He was near the sinks. Tall, dark hair. She squinted as if peering through time. "He had that prefect badge. The one everyone likes. The handsome one. Nadawash. This. Wa. Bo. Candy. I need Q. Kaiji." Albus did not need the name, but he asked anyway. "Do you remember it?" Myrtle swallowed, and for an instant she looked very young. "Tom," she whispered, as though the sound itself could summon him. "Tom Riddle." The taps dripped. Somewhere deep in the pipes, water gurgled like a throat clearing. Albus nodded once. "Thank you," he said. Myrtle's eyes filled again, furious at her own vulnerability. "Are you going to do anything?" she demanded. Albus looked at the carved serpents and felt the castle listening. "Yes," he said. "This time, yes." Back in his office, Albus shut the door and drew the curtains as though against more than snow. The instruments on his shelves clicked softly, responding to tension like nervous birds. He fed the fire, not for warmth but for steadiness, and stood before his desk where a coil of fine silver thread lay waiting. The thread was not truly thread. It was a charm, spun from his own magic into something that could listen. It would not hold a dragon, nor trap a poltergeist, but it could catch the echo of a presence if he placed it right. He ran the thread through his fingers, feeling it hum. Then he began to tie it into the air, knot after invisible knot, murmuring words too old to be taught to children. The room smelled briefly of rain and metal, and something like lightning. When he finished, the charm hovered for a moment in front of him, a faint glimmer. He pinched it between two fingers, and it became almost nothing. "Let me know," he whispered. He thought of Myrtle's yellow eyes, of a boy's hissed syllables. He thought of Tom's smiling face in the great hall, the way it had offered comfort and collected fear at the same time. It would have been easier to say nothing. To let the ministry arrive, let the board decide, let the school close for a year, and reopen with platitudes and memorial plaques. Easier, too, to accept the story that would undoubtedly rise up. Some convenient monster, some convenient culprit. Hogwarts, like any institution, had a talent for surviving scandals by burying them. But Albus had seen what Tom did with buried things. He planted them, and they grew. He walked to the window and watched the snow whip across the grounds. Beyond the forest lay the village. Beyond that, the wider world, where another war raged. The children here pretended it was distant. It was not. Darkness did not respect borders. Albus turned back to his desk, to the empty parchment waiting there like a blank oath. He did not write. Instead, he placed his wand in his sleeve and extinguished the fire with a flick. The sudden dimness felt honest. If Tom went walking tonight, Albus would be there. The castle at night was a different creature, awake in ways daytime hid, its staircases creaking like joints, its portraits whispering warnings to one another. Albus stepped into the corridor and let his magic settle over him like a veil. He did not become invisible. Not truly. He became difficult to notice, a flaw in the air. He waited. Time passed in the way it always did when one listened for footsteps. The torches burned lower. The silence thickened, then broke as a door somewhere opened with the soft complaint of hinges. Tom emerged from a shadowed passage near the Slytherin wing, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone entitled to the castle's secrets. His shoes made no sound on the stones. Either he had learned to tread lightly, or he had charmed the souls. His prefect badge caught the torchlight for an instant, a flash of authority. Albus followed at a distance that was not quite a distance, staying with the boy the way a thought stays with the mind. Tom did not look back. He did not need to. He walked as though the corridor belonged to him, and perhaps in his imagination, it already did. He passed a portrait of a stern witch who frowned and muttered, "Up to no good," but she did not raise an alarm. Even paintings hesitated before charm. As Tom rounded a corner, he paused beside a window. Snow swirled outside like ghosts. For a moment, his reflection hovered faintly in the glass, broken by lead lines into fragments. Albus watched that reflection and saw something in the boy's face that no one at breakfast had seen. A hardness, patient and hungry. Tom lifted a hand to the window as if feeling the cold through stone. Then he withdrew it and continued, turning toward the older corridors where students rarely went at night unless they were lost or foolish. Albus's pulse slowed. This was no childish prank. This was ritual. A path walked before. When Tom reached the corridor with the abandoned bathroom, he did not hesitate. He checked once, swiftly, for other patrols, his head tilting, listening. Then, he slipped inside. Albus waited 2 heartbeats, then followed. Inside, the air was colder, as if the room remembered Myrtle's death and refused warmth out of loyalty to grief. The drips from the taps sounded louder at night. Tom crossed to the sinks without looking around again. He was alone. He behaved as though alone meant safety. He leaned toward the middle sink, the one whose tarnished faucet was shaped like a serpent's head. His posture was almost reverent. Then he spoke. The sound was not a spell taught in Hogwarts. It was older than Latin syllables and cleaner than English consonants. It slid out of his mouth like steam, like a hiss between stones. Albus felt his skin prickle, not because the language itself was magic, but because it was a key. The sink shuddered. The serpent carving seemed to ripple. With a grinding sound that vibrated in Albus's teeth, the basin began to move, sinking and twisting aside as if pulled by an unseen hand. A hole opened in the floor, black as a mouth. Tom's face remained calm, but his eyes brightened with a private thrill. He knelt and looked down into darkness with the satisfaction of someone checking on a possession. Albus watched from the doorway, the disillusionment charm tight around him. He could have moved then, could have spoken, could have tried to seize the boy and drag him away. But the opening yawned wide, and something below seemed to breathe. Air rising stale and warm, carrying a faint sour scent like scales and rot. Tom reached inside his robes. For an instant, the torchlight caught a small black book tucked close to his chest. He did not remove it. He simply touched it, as though reassuring himself it was still there. Then he stood and slipped into the hole with practiced ease, disappearing into the dark. The sink began to slide back into place. The opening narrowed. Albus stepped forward, swift now. He reached the hole as it shrank and thrust his hand down, grasping at air and stone, and his fingers closed on leather. The little book came free with a jerk, snagged on the edge as the floor sealed. Albus pulled it up and held it against his palm. The sink clicked back into place, silent again, as though nothing had moved at all. The bathroom returned to its miserable normality. Dripping taps, cracked tiles, Myrtle's memory pressed into stone. Albus stood alone, the black diary in his hand, and felt it pulse once, faintly, like a heart that should not exist. The diary lay on the desk like an accusation. It was ordinary at first glance. No jeweled clasp, no embossed initials, no obvious curse crawling across its leather. Yet the longer Albus looked at it, the more the air around it seemed to thicken, as though the book resented scrutiny. He did not touch it with his bare hand again. He conjured a thin layer of parchment between his skin and the leather, then traced his wand in a slow circle over the cover. No immediate reaction. No screaming curse. No sudden smoke. That too was a kind of warning. Truly dangerous objects rarely announced themselves with theatrics. They waited. Albus tested it with gentler spells first, revealing charms, simple probes for concealment. The diary remained stubbornly blank. Yet the instruments behind him gave small nervous clicks, like teeth chattering. Something about the magic was wrong. Not malevolent in the crude sense. Hungry. He set the wand down and picked up a quill. For a long moment he stared at the empty first page. If it was what he suspected, writing might invite it in. But ignorance was not protection. Ignorance was what darkness fed on. He dipped the quill and wrote, in steady script, "Who are you?" The ink sank into the page and vanished as though drunk. Albus's jaw tightened. The page was blank again. Then, slowly, fresh ink began to bloom from the paper itself, forming letters as if an invisible hand wrote them. "Hello, Professor." The handwriting was elegant, controlled, familiar in the way a well-practiced lie was familiar. Albus felt cold spread along his spine. "Tom," he murmured, though no one could hear him but the book. The ink formed again. "You have found me." Albus kept his breathing even. He wrote, "What is this?" The answer came after a pause long enough to feel like amusement. A memory. A memory did not speak unbidden. A memory did not watch. And a memory did not feel like a heart. Albus wrote carefully, "Show me." The candle flame bent as if a gust had passed through the room. The shadows thickened. Then the world shifted, not with a portkey's jerk, but with a slow, drowning pull, as though Albus were being drawn through ink. He saw stone. He saw water. He saw a round-bellied pipe and a boy's hand steady on the slick surface as he descended into blackness. He saw Tom, 16, handsome, eyes shining, standing before an arch carved with serpents, whispering in that hissing tongue. He saw the arch open. He saw the gleam of enormous scales sliding through darkness. He saw a flash of yellow eyes, bright as coins in a skull. And then he saw a girl's face, startled and afraid, and a sudden stillness as life left it. Albus tore himself back, slamming the diary shut with a force that made his desk shudder. The room snapped into place around him. His hand shook once, then steadied. On the cover of the diary, faintly, a dark stain spread like a bruise, as if the book had tasted him. Horace's office always smelled of sweetness layered over bitterness, like perfume attempting to hide rot. Comfort, Albus had long suspected, was Horace's chosen spell against a world he preferred not to see clearly. Tonight, the comfort failed him. Horace stared at the diary on his desk as though it were a spider poised to leap. His face had gone pale beneath its usual ruddy warmth. He dabbed at his brow with a handkerchief that trembled. "Where did you get it?" he whispered. Albus did not sit. It was in Tom's possession. Horace's lips parted, then closed again. He swallowed. Tom keeps all sorts of notebooks. Ambitious students do. I mean, it could be anything. A journal. A trap, Albus said quietly. Horace's eyes flicked up, then away. "Albus," he pleaded, attempting to summon joviality like a shield. "You do have a tendency to assume the worst of people." Albus's gaze remained gentle. That gentleness did not soften the steel beneath it. "Tell me what he asked you." Horace made a choking sound. "He didn't. He wouldn't. He was curious, that's all. A brilliant boy. Curious. No. A brilliant boy does not ask about splitting a soul as though discussing a recipe," Albus said. Horace froze. The handkerchief stopped moving. For a long moment, only the soft ticking of a clock filled the room. Then Horace exhaled, long and shuddering, and his eyes filled with humiliation. "He asked," he admitted. "He came in, smiling, polite, like he always is, and he asked about the darkest kind of magic, the kind that doesn't merely kill." Albus' voice softened further, because cruelty would not loosen guilt. "What kind?" Horace stared at his own hands as though he wanted to wash them. "Horcruxes," he whispered. The words seemed to dim the candlelight. Albus felt the syllables settle into his mind like a key turning. "You told him." Horace shook his head rapidly. "No, not properly. Merlin, I didn't think he was a child. I warned him. I told him it was forbidden." "And he listened?" Albus asked, though he already knew. Horace let out a small, broken laugh. "He listened beautifully. He always listens beautifully." Albus looked at the diary again. A memory, it had called itself. A fragment with teeth. Horace's voice dropped further, almost inaudible. "If you have that," he said, "then you must be careful. It isn't just evidence. It's him." Albus's eyes lifted. "Yes," he said, "and that is why it must be seen." Horace's face twisted in panic. "Seen? By whom?" "By everyone who is about to let an innocent boy be ruined to protect a guilty one," Albus said, and watched Horace flinch as though struck. Tom did not panic. Panic was for people who believed in rescue. He sat on the edge of his bed with his hands folded neatly, as if waiting for a lecture. Around him, the other boys slept, breathing shallowly in the damp warmth of the lake's filtered light. The greenish shimmer from the windows painted their faces sickly, turning them into masks. Tom's trunk stood open at his feet. He had emptied it with methodical speed. Books stacked, robes folded, trophies arranged. The space where the diary should have been was a small, exact absence, like a missing tooth. His mind moved faster than his hands. Where had it slipped? How? He replayed the descent into the hidden passage, the feel of stone under his fingers, the satisfaction of the chamber answering him. He remembered touching the diary, the familiar reassurance of it against his ribs. Then, nothing. A blank moment. Not a hole in his memory, not a charm. Simply a missing detail, the way one might forget the sound of a door closing. Someone had taken it. Only one person in the castle would have dared follow him that far. Only one would have understood enough to recognize the diary as more than a schoolboy's journal. Tom's mouth curved into something that was not a smile. Albus. The name tasted like a challenge. Tom had known for years that the Transfiguration professor watched him differently. Not like the others. Not with admiration. Not with fear. With suspicion sharpened by intelligence. It was infuriating. It was also instructive. Most adults could be soothed. Some could be dazzled. Albus could not. Tom closed his trunk and fastened the latch with a soft click. He rose, silent as smoke, and crossed to the dormitory door. He did not leave yet. There was time before dawn, and there were steps that must be taken. He could have gone to Albus' office immediately, pried the diary back by force. But force was crude. Force drew witnesses. Tom did not need witnesses. He needed leverage. An innocent boy was already trembling on the edge of ruin. A boy with a forbidden pet and a face that made others eager to blame him. A boy whose kindness was stupid enough to be predictable. Tom's eyes gleamed. If Albus wanted proof, then Tom would give him a story, one so neat the ministry would wrap it in ribbons. He slipped from the dormitory without waking anyone, leaving behind only the faintest stir of cold in the air. By evening, word had spread that the headmaster meant to close the school. Students moved through corridors as though packing already, clutching books like talismans, whispering about home and safety and whether safety existed anywhere at all. Tom found Rubeus near a stone archway, half hidden from the main flow of students. The boy's shoulders were hunched, and he held a wooden box close to his chest as though it contained his heart. Tom's expression arranged itself into sympathy as easily as another boy might straighten a tie. "Rubeus," he said, voice low, confidential. "I've been looking for you." Rubeus jerked in surprise. "Tom, He looked around as if afraid of being seen with him. Tom smiled. "Don't worry. I won't keep you. I wanted to warn you." Rubeus's face went paler. "Warn me?" "They're frightened," Tom said, letting regret color his tone. "The teachers, the board, the ministry might come. When frightened people look for someone to blame, they notice things." Rubeus swallowed. "I ain't done nothing." "I know," Tom said smoothly. "I know you haven't hurt anyone. But there are rumors about creatures, about monsters, and I've heard whispers." He leaned a fraction closer, as if sharing a secret. "About your spider." Rubeus's grip on the box tightened, knuckles whitening. "Who told you?" Tom lifted a hand, a gentle gesture. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that if someone finds it, they will use it as proof. They will say, 'Look, he keeps a monster. Of course, it was him.'" Rubeus's eyes shone with desperate tears. "But it's not a monster," he choked. "It's just—" "Then save it," Tom urged softly. "Take it away. Tonight. Not before someone else does." And, Rubeus looked torn, as if the idea of parting from the creature was pain. "Where would I—" "The forest," Tom said. "It can live there. It will be safe. And so will you." Rubeus stared, struggling to think. Yeah, it would help me?" Tom's smile widened, almost tender. "Of course. I don't want to see you punished for something you didn't do." Rubeus' shoulders sagged with relief so profound it was almost childlike. "Thank you," he whispered. Tom nodded, as if he had bestowed a gift. Inside, he felt only the clean satisfaction of a trap setting itself perfectly into place. They went after curfew. Rubeus could not have done otherwise. The hallways were thick with teachers and prefects and nervous whispers. Night offered cover, and cover, Tom had assured him, was necessary. The air at the forest edge was warmer than the snowfield behind them, damp with rot. Rubeus's boots sank into mud that smelled of mushrooms and secrets. He clutched the box against his chest, murmuring under his breath as though to soothe what was inside. Tom carried a lantern. The light cut through the trees in a narrow path, turning every shadow into a lurking figure. Tom's face was carved into calm by the flicker. His eyes watched everything. "Are you sure it'll be all right?" Rubeus asked, voice strained. "It will be better than all right," Tom said. "It will be free." Rubeus nodded, swallowing hard. "It don't like being cooped up," he muttered, then flinched as something rustled nearby. Tom paused as if listening, then continued. "Just a fox," he said lightly. They pushed deeper, where the trees grew thicker and the lantern seemed smaller. Rubeus began to pant from effort and fear, his breath loud in his ears. At last Tom stopped beside a hollow beneath an old oak. "Here," he said. "Open it." Rubeus hesitated. His hands shook. "Aragog," he whispered, and the name sounded like a prayer. Tom's smile did not reach his eyes. "Go on." Rubeus lifted the latch. The lid creaked. Something inside shifted. A faint clicking, like nails against wood. Rubeus leaned forward, whispering comfort. Tom stepped back, lantern held high. The creature emerged, legs unfolding. Too many joints, a sheen of hair catching the light. Even in the dimness it was enormous, and it would grow larger. Its eyes glinted, not yellow like Myrtle's monster, but black and intelligent. Rubeus made a small sound of awe and affection. "Go on," he urged. "Go on, you'll be safe." A second light flared behind them. "Expelliarmus." Rubeus's wand flew from his hand, spinning into darkness. He whirled, stunned. Teachers emerged from the trees, faces hard with fear and vindication. A ministry wizard stood among them, his cloak marked with authority. At the front, Armando looked sick, as if he hated himself for being here. Behind him, Horace looked as though he might faint. Tom turned, lantern steady, and said with practiced horror, "Professor, thank Merlin you're here. I followed him. I tried to stop him. Look at that creature." Rubeus's mouth fell open. "Tom," he breathed, betrayed before he understood betrayal existed. Tom's eyes met his for a heartbeat, cold, triumphant. The forest seemed to lean in, listening as the trap snapped shut. They marched Rubeus through the entrance hall as though he were already a criminal. The torches burned too brightly, throwing harsh light over every face, and the stone floor echoed with boots and sobs. "I didn't do it," Rubeus shouted, voice cracking. "I didn't. He told me." The ministry wizard tightened his grip. "Enough." Armando stood at the base of the marble staircase, his hands clenched so hard the veins stood out. His mouth worked as though he were chewing words he could not swallow. Horace hovered near him, pale and sweating, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Tom stood slightly apart, the picture of restrained virtue. His robes were immaculate despite the forest mud. His expression held sorrow, concern, and just enough bravery to satisfy the watching crowd. Students whispered behind their hands. Some looked relieved, as if the capture of a culprit made them safe. Others looked horrified, because they knew Rubeus. Albus pushed through the cluster of onlookers like a blade through cloth. The murmurs faltered as faces turned toward him. His calm did not soften what radiated from him now. Not anger exactly, but certainty, cold and bright. "Headmaster," Albus said, voice low. Armando flinched at the sound of his name. "Albus," he said hoarse. "It's done." "Nothing is done," Albus replied. The ministry wizard stiffened. "Professor Dumbledore, we have credible testimony. The student was found with a monstrous creature." "A creature," Albus said. which did not kill Myrtle. A hush fell. Myrtle's name carried weight now. It was a stone in the mouth. Tom's eyes flicked toward Albus, and for a fraction of a second the mask thinned. Then it returned, smooth as glass. "Professor," Tom said politely, "I only wanted to protect the school." Albus looked at him. "Yes," he said softly. "I believe you wanted something." Tom's smile tightened. "Rubius is dangerous. He keeps things he shouldn't. We can't ignore that." "We can," Albus said, distinguished between foolishness and murder. Armando's shoulders sagged. "The board demands action," he murmured. "The ministry demands a culprit, and the school." His voice cracked. "The school must be protected." Rubius's face twisted with despair. "Professor," he pleaded, eyes on Albus. "Tell M." Albus stepped closer to Armando and spoke in a voice meant only for him. "Come to my office," he said. "Now, before you make an irreversible mistake." Armando's eyes flickered, torn. The ministry wizard began to protest, but Armando lifted a shaking hand. "Take him to my study," he ordered. "Not," he swallowed. "Not to Azkaban. Not yet." Tom's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Headmaster." Armando turned away, as if unable to bear Tom's gaze. Tom watched Albus then, and the watching was no longer courteous. It was a vow, silent and sharp as the edge of a knife. Armando's study smelled of old ink and resignation. The portraits on the walls had drawn their curtains, as though refusing to witness more shame. Only one remained half open, a stern wizard whose eyes glittered with judgment. Albus placed the diary on the desk between them. Armando stared at it with distrust, as if it were a venomous animal. Horace stood behind the chair, wringing his hands. The ministry wizard, young enough to look uncomfortable with his own authority, leaned in. "What is this?" he demanded. "Evidence," Albus said. Tom's name was not spoken yet. Albus let the diary speak for itself. He opened it carefully. He did not write at first. He simply held his wand above the page and murmured a charm that coaxed truth outward rather than tearing it free. The air thickened. The candle flames bowed. A coldness seeped into the room, and Armando shivered beneath his robes. Ink bloomed across the page in neat, elegant script. "You have brought friends, Professor." Horace made a strangled sound. Armando's face drained of color. "Merlin," he whispered. The ministry wizard's eyes widened. "That's Tom's handwriting," Horace said, almost inaudible. Albus wrote one word, "Show." The page went blank, then began to shimmer. Not like a moving photograph, not like a simple memory charm, but like a doorway opening into someone else's mind. The desk, the walls, the people, all of it seemed to fade behind a curtain of darkness and stone. They saw the chamber. They saw a boy, Tom, standing before a carved archway, his face lit with triumph. They heard the hissed syllables that made the serpents in the stone seem to stir. They saw the massive movement of scales, the glint of yellow eyes, the girl's shocked expression as she stepped out of a cubicle and died without a sound. Armando clapped a hand to his mouth. Horace stumbled back, eyes wide with horror at the thing he had once dismissed as curiosity. The ministry wizard went rigid. That's impossible. A basilisk." "It is not impossible," Albus said quietly. "It is simply inconvenient." The memory shifted. They saw Tom's hands, calm and careful, writing in the diary with a satisfaction too intimate to be schoolboy pride. They saw him glance toward a larger boy, Rubius, watching the spider in his box with affection. Tom's eyes narrowed, calculating. Armando made a small, broken noise. "He used him," he whispered. "Yes," Albus said. The diary's magic trembled, as though offended by being used against itself. Albus closed it, ending the vision. The room snapped back into place. Silence fell, thick as snow. At last the ministry wizard spoke, voice hoarse. "If we reveal this," he said, "the school." "The school," Albus replied, "is already bleeding. The only question is whether we bandage it with truth or with lies." Now, Armando stared at the diary as though it were a mirror showing him his own cowardice. "Publicly," he whispered. "You want to do it publicly?" Albus met his gaze. "Yes," he said. "Before Tom leaves these walls, and the world learns too late what you chose to protect." Tom did not rush. He never rushed. Even when rage clawed at the inside of his ribs, he moved as though time obeyed him. He approached Albus' office like a guest arriving for tea. Quiet steps, measured breath. The corridor outside was empty, the portraits asleep behind their curtains. Only the torches remained awake, their flames bending slightly as he passed. The door was different than it had been yesterday. Tom could feel it before he saw it. The air around it tasted faintly of iron, a tang that suggested warding charms braided with intent. There were no obvious symbols carved into the wood, no crude warnings. The protection was refined, almost polite. Tom's mouth tightened. Albus was taking him seriously. He placed his palm against the door. Beneath the wood, magic hummed like a taut wire. For a moment he considered force, raw, violent magic that would snap the wards apart like brittle bone. It would work. It would also announce itself to half the castle. Tom had not survived the orphanage by announcing himself. Instead, he listened. Wards had patterns. Every spell did. He let his own magic stretch out like a careful hand, feeling along the edges, searching for the place where Albus' attention had wavered. There. A seam. Tom smiled faintly. Albus was brilliant, yes. But brilliance could be arrogant. Everyone left a seam somewhere, because everyone believed themselves too clever to be beaten. Tom whispered a charm under his breath, delicate as a lockpick. The wards responded, flexing. For a heartbeat, the seam widened. Then the door flared white-hot with defensive magic. Tom jerked his hand back, skin stinging. The torch flames leapt. Somewhere deep inside the office, an instrument clattered an alarm. The seam snapped shut like a mouth biting down. Tom stood very still, his pulse steady despite the sting on his palm. The wards had recognized him, not merely as an intruder, but as a particular kind of intruder, named and anticipated. Albus had woven the protection with Tom in mind. The realization did not frighten Tom. It delighted him in a cold way. It meant Albus had chosen him as an enemy. It meant the game was finally honest. Tom flexed his fingers once, then stepped back into the shadows. If the diary could not be stolen tonight, it could be discredited tomorrow. Truth was only powerful when people believed it, and Tom had made an art of belief. The great hall filled as though drawn by gravity. Students arrived in clusters, eyes darting, voices low. Even the ghosts drifted closer, curious and uneasy. The ceiling reflected the storm outside. Clouds churned like bruises, and lightning flickered soundlessly above the floating candles. Armando sat at the high table with his hands folded, knuckles white. He looked as though the chair beneath him had turned to thorns. Horace sat beside him, perspiration shining on his brow. His usual cheeriness collapsed into a haunted stare at his own plate. Albus stood behind the high table for a moment, listening to the murmurs ripple through the room. Fear. Hope. The hungry curiosity of children sensing drama. The brittle excitement of those who thought punishment meant safety. Tom entered with the Slytherins, moving like a dark ribbon through the crowd. Heads turned toward him without conscious thought. He took his seat and folded his hands, posture flawless. His face was solemn, as befit a hero who had helped expose a threat. A few students smiled at him in relief. Others watched him warily, remembering the forest, remembering Rubius's pleading voice. Albus felt the diary under his cloak like a weight, not heavy in pounds, but heavy in consequence. It pulsed faintly, as though it knew it was about to be displayed and resented it. A hush fell as Armando rose. His voice carried, shaky but authoritative. He spoke of tragedy. He spoke of safety. He spoke of measures taken. He did not speak of Rubius by name, but the absence of the name was its own cruelty. Then Armando turned toward Albus, his gaze pleading and resigned. "Professor Dumbledore," he said, and the title sounded like surrender. "You asked for this moment. Speak." Albus stepped forward. He looked out at the sea of faces, children who trusted adults because they had no choice. He felt, sharply, how easily that trust could be broken and twisted into obedience. He thought of Tom's smile at breakfast, of Myrtle's sobs, of Rubius' hands clenched in despair. He set the diary on the high table where everyone could see it. A plain black book, unimpressive, almost laughably ordinary. "Many of you," Albus began, voice calm, "have been told a story." Tom's eyes lifted, attentive, polite. Albus continued, "Tonight, you will see the truth." Albus opened the diary with deliberate care. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Even the candles wavered. He did not ask the book questions now. He did not bargain with it. He raised his wand and spoke a charm that magnified what lay within, not as a private conversation between ink and reader, but as a spectacle of truth. The air above the diary shimmered. Darkness pooled, then thinned, and suddenly the space between the high table and the students was filled with a moving vision, large as life. Stone walls, a carved arch, serpents in relief, a boy's voice, hissing in a language most could not understand yet somehow recognized as wrong. Students gasped. A few screamed. Professors rose instinctively, hands on wands. Tom's face did not change. Only his eyes sharpened, a fractional tightening that might have been concentration. In the vision, Tom stood in the chamber, his expression alight with triumph. The basilisk's immense shape slid past, scales glistening. Yellow eyes flared. Myrtle stepped out, startled, and fell, her body crumpling with terrifying suddenness. A sob burst from somewhere in the hall. A raven-clawed girl covered her mouth with both hands. The vision shifted again, showing Tom writing in the diary, ink soaking greedily into the page. His face was serene, almost reverent, as though performing a sacred rite. Albus watched the students' faces change as understanding crept in. Not all of them understood the details. They did not need to. They understood the shape of it, murder, pride, and the casual certainty of someone who believed himself above consequence. Armando sat frozen, tears shining in his eyes. Horace swayed on his chair, one hand pressed to his chest as though his heart might flee. The ministry wizard at the side of the hall went rigid, his expression shifting from disbelief to horror. Albus spoke over the vision, voice steady. "This is not a rumor. This is not a legend. This is what happened beneath your feet." The vision ended abruptly, snapping back into empty air. The hall was left with only stormlight and silence, and the plain black diary on the table, open like a mouth. All eyes turned toward Tom. Tom rose slowly, perfectly composed. He looked at Albus with polite astonishment, as though he had been unfairly accused of cheating on an exam. "Professor," he said, voice smooth enough to soothe the crowd. "That is a clever illusion." Tom stepped into the center aisle as though it were his stage. He did not look frightened. He did not look angry. He looked wounded in the most flattering way, like a good boy punished for someone else's sin. "There is a war," Tom said, voice carrying effortlessly. "Not the Muggle one outside these walls, though that is terrible enough, but a war of fear inside them. We are frightened, we want a culprit, and we have been given a performance." Murmurs rippled. A few students nodded, caught by the calm authority in his tone. It was easier to believe the charming boy than the idea that charm could hide a monster. Tom turned slightly, addressing the high table with respectful poise. "Professor Dumbledore is brilliant," he said. "No one doubts that, but brilliance can be mistaken. Or, he let the pause hang, heavy with implication. It can be used. Horace made a choked sound as if trying to speak and failing. Armando's hands trembled in his lap. Tom looked around at the students, eyes warm. I went into the forest because I was worried. I found a creature that could have killed Myrtle. I brought teachers. I did what any of you would want done to keep our school open and safe. Nay, nah, a Hufflepuff boy whispered. He did, though. And his friend elbowed him, uncertain. Tom's gaze landed on Albus again, and beneath the polite deference something cold glinted, like steel under silk. If a diary can show such a vivid scene, Tom continued, then it can show anything the person wielding it wishes. A memory can be altered. An illusion can be crafted. We should not condemn anyone, without proper process. He spread his hands, the gesture open, reasonable. Let the ministry take it, he offered, magnanimous. Let them examine it. Let them question me. I have nothing to hide. The words were honey. The confidence was calculated. Tom was offering himself as evidence of his own innocence, because he had learned long ago that adults found it comforting to believe in self-assured children. Albus waited until the murmurs began to swell, until doubts started to crawl back into minds that had just seen murder. Then he spoke, voice quiet, and the quiet carried like a blade. You are right, Tom, he said. We should not rely on a single source. Tom's smile tightened. Precisely. Albus turned his head slightly and addressed the air near the Ravenclaw table. Myrtle, he said gently. Would you join us? A cold wind swept through the hall. Candles flickered. Students shivered. From the direction of the doors, a pale figure drifted forward, round spectacles gleaming, eyes red with old tears and new fury. Myrtle's voice rang out, shrill and undeniable. It was him, she cried, pointing at Tom. It was Tom. He was there, by the sinks, hissing like a snake. Nah. The hall erupted in gasps and shouted whispers. Tom's face, for the first time, faltered, a fractional tightening at the corner of his mouth, a flicker of something vicious. Albus watched that flicker with grim certainty. The mask was slipping. For a heartbeat, Tom stood very still. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Myrtle floated, trembling with righteous rage and the pent-up misery of being ignored even in death. Then Tom's eyes met Albus. The charm in them vanished. The warmth went out as cleanly as a candle pinched between fingers. What remained was a cold fury so controlled it was almost beautiful. You, Tom said softly, and the word was not respectful. It was intimate hate. Albus did not flinch. Yes, he replied. Tom's hand moved toward his pocket with a speed that betrayed the calm he had performed. Not to draw a wand, he already had it hidden in his sleeve, but toward something else, something he could not allow to be taken from him again. He had been outmaneuvered publicly, cornered in front of witnesses. That, more than exposure, was unbearable. The ministry wizard stepped forward, wand raised. Tom Riddle, he said harshly, you will come with. Tom's wand flashed into his hand like a blade drawn from a scabbard. The hog gasped. Students scrambled backward, benches scraping the floor. Tom did not aim at the ministry wizard. That would have been predictable. He aimed at Myrtle. A jet of magic shot toward the ghost. Not to kill, because death could not be repeated, but to silence, to shred, to banish. Albus moved. His wand came up with a smoothness that was not hurried and not slow, but perfectly timed. The spell struck his shield and burst into a spray of sparks that rained down like angry fireflies. Myrtle screamed and ducked behind a floating candle, absurd in her fear and heart-breakingly human. Tom's face twisted, the mask fully gone now. Always, he hissed, not Parseltongue but something worse, pure contempt. Always in my way. Not always, Albus said, voice steady over the rising chaos. Only when you choose darkness. Tom's eyes glittered. For a moment, Albus saw the orphanage in them. The cold beds, the cruelty, the learned belief that power was the only safety. He saw also what Tom had built on top of that, a hunger that no comfort could fill. Another spell flew, Tom trying to shatter the hall's torches, to plunge the room into confusion. Albus countered, lights snapping back, candles flaring as though in indignation. Students screamed. Professors surged forward. Armando shouted something incoherent, hands shaking. Horace sat frozen, horror pinned to his face like a mask of his own. Tom's gaze flicked once toward the doors, calculating. He had never intended to be caught. He had intended to leave Hogwarts with secrets intact, his future unchallenged. Now the future had teeth. With a sharp hissing word, Tom hurled a burst of smoke so thick it swallowed the aisle. It was not ordinary smoke. It clung, cold and oily, obscuring sight and muffling sound. Albus stepped toward it, wand cutting through darkness. "Tom!" he called, and his voice held not just authority but warning of what Tom would become if he fled. For a moment, through the smoke, Tom's silhouette appeared, tall, slender, perfectly poised. He looked back once, and in his eyes Albus saw a promise. Then the silhouette vanished, swallowed by the castle's ancient passages, by secrets older than any student. When the smoke thinned, Tom was gone. Albus stood amid the chaos with the diary still open on the high table, its blank pages quiet now, as if satisfied. The hall trembled with fear and outrage, and the dawning understanding that the monster beneath Hogwarts had worn a human face. Albus closed the diary gently, as one might close the lid of a coffin, and felt the weight of the war that had just begun.